America, the Covenant Nation. Chapter 1, Colonial Foundations, the Two Americas. Part 2, the first years of European colonization of America. The Spanish first set the agenda for American exploration and settlement. At the time, the 1500s, when these two Catholic and Protestant cultures were first confronting each other, the leading power of Europe was unquestionably fervently Catholic Spain, under the rule of the Habsburg family. Throughout the 1500s and into the 1600s, Catholic Spain was the dominant power in Europe. This was due in part to the toughness of the Habsburg kings, Charles, first half of the 1500s, and his son Philip, the second half of the 1500s, but also in part, in great part actually, to the flow of gold into Spain resulting from the Spanish plundering of American Indian societies, notably in Mexico and Peru. When on behalf of the Spanish monarchy, Columbus had discovered America in 1492, it introduced Europe to a vast land, quickly revealing to be of considerable wealth, including, very importantly, gold. The Spanish were, of course, the first to benefit from this discovery, and they benefited royally. The Spanish plunder in gold and silver taken from Mexico and Peru made Habsburg Spain the richest and most powerful society in all of Europe during the 1500s. Spain secured this huge wealth by sending young and aspiring, that is, lesser, noblemen to America to secure the bulk of this wealth for their king, and personal wealth and noble title for themselves in the process. These young men fulfilled their aristocratic ambitions not only by pure plunder, but by taking over the indigenous Indian population and working them in the mines and on the land. This slave-like labor provided an ongoing source of wealth for these new Spanish lords. A feudal-like political system thus settled over Spanish America, much like the system back in Europe, where peasants and serfs worked almost endlessly for their aristocratic lords or masters. Thus it was that America offered ambitious Spaniards the path from relative poverty, which even the landed aristocracy back in Europe were often experiencing, to the acquired or restored dignity, which was supposed to be the natural right of any European aristocrat. In short, the opening up of America extended the Spanish feudal system to that continent, a feudal system offering wealth and dignity to aspiring lesser nobility, or nobility who had simply fallen on hard times, or who were just those seeking to escape their positions among the lower social orders of feudal Spain, hoping to rise to the status of noblemen from newly acquired American wealth. Spanish kings, however, were not very comfortable about the ambitions of these young conquistadores, or conquerors, who were merciless exploiters of the labors of the American Indians that had the misfortune of falling into the hands of these adventurers. The Spanish kings considered the Indians their personal subjects, much like the Spanish peasants who worked the aristocrats' lands back in Europe. Also, the Spanish kings felt something of a moral responsibility for extending the reach of the Christian faith to their Indian subjects. So, the kings sent priests to America to convert the Indians, and then to protect them from the cruel greed of the Spanish conquistadores. Thus, to the mix of a rising Spanish feudal system in America, in which Spanish noblemen ruled the surrounding land and its inhabitants from their feudal manors or haciendas, the kings added the political oversight of their colonies through the Spanish Catholic Church's hierarchy of bishops, priests, and monks. These were called on to help keep the American social order under the control of the political authorities back in Spain. Meanwhile, other ambitious Europeans looked with envy on the Spanish success in America. But at the time, the Spanish Navy so completely dominated the water passages from Europe to America that it was very perilous for anyone else to attempt to duplicate what the Spanish were doing in America. The Spanish would simply not allow the intrusion of European outsiders into their American lands. But the rewards were too great for other Europeans not to try to challenge the Spanish monopoly. The rise of the Dutch. Since the Spanish quest was for aristocratic status, not success at the game of commerce and trade, very little of this plunder got devoted to the building up of Spanish industry and commerce. Almost all of it went to the purchase of land and aristocratic title that went with the land. However, the Dutch, who were part of the Spanish kingdom, even though way north of the Spanish heartland, and of a strong Protestant Calvinist disposition, were a very different breed. The Dutch Netherlands was small in land size. Most of it wrested from the North Sea through a laborious process of building dikes to hold back the sea and then constantly draining the land with their windmills. Most of the Dutch lived along the coast in the province of Holland, which was dotted with cities engaged in manufacture, banking, shipping, and trade. Ultimately, most of the Spanish wealth brought back from America by the Spanish conquistadores eventually ended up in the hands of the very industrious and commercially clever Dutch. Nonetheless, Habsburg Spain, as long as the gold held out, appeared wealthy and powerful and dominated European life. But when that gold ran out, as it was destined to do, aristocratic Spain began to slip rapidly in power. But the Dutch, who had learned how to invest that gold in projects that multiplied their wealth, turned from a small outpost of the Spanish kingdom into a major European power. Little by little, the late 1500s, the Dutch began to move towards independence, precipitating a terrible war conducted by Spain in an attempt to force the Dutch back into submission. All this did was to steal the will of the Dutch and further enfeeble the Spanish, the early 1600s. In the meantime, the Dutch had begun their own exploration of the lands to the west in America. They set up a merchant corporation to bring back the wealth of the central shores of North America and to find passage through America to their valuable commercial holdings in Asia, which were the former Portuguese spice islands of the East Indies, hopefully up the Hudson River, where they positioned some Dutch settlements. The French get involved. Spain had not appeared as interested in North America as it did in Central and South America. Therefore, North America seemed to offer the best possibilities for others to get in on the act. By the beginning of the 1600s, it seemed that the time was right, particularly after the Spanish Army and Navy had experienced a string of disastrous setbacks, trying to keep both their Protestant Dutch subjects from breaking away from Habsburg Catholic Spain authority, and the English privateers, actually merely pirates officially authorized by English Queen Elizabeth, from harassing the Spanish fleets bringing gold from America. The French thus sent traders to Canada to take advantage of the great wealth in animal furs of the more northerly region of the Americas, and sent priests to Canada to bring Indian souls to the church. But the chill of the Canadian North proved to be not greatly inviting to the French settlers, and the French imperial venture in Canada did not take on great importance in the political scheme of things. England's early response to the new American dynamic: privateering. At first, England's main ambition to the west seemed to be merely raiding the gold-laden Spanish galleons, shipping their Indian plunder across the Atlantic from America to Spain. Under Queen Elizabeth, pirates, or privateers, that is, in the private business of raiding enemy Spanish fleets, were treated as noblemen. Sir Francis Drake, in particular, excelled at this game of plunder. The destruction of the Spanish Armada, 1588. Of course, the Spanish tired quickly of this English game, and in 1588 sent a massive fleet to crush the English navy, and also forced the rather reform-minded or Protestant English back into the true mother or Catholic Church. But this mighty Spanish Armada ended up itself crushed by foul winds and clever English seamanship. This marked the beginning of the rise of England as a major naval power and the decline of Spain as the dominant European power. But it would be a while before the English would themselves get deeply involved in the process of bringing American lands into the English realm.